The blizzard came down the valley the way a wounded spirit might limp through a graveyard, slow, staggering, determined to swallow whatever warmth dared survive its passage. I remember that morning as if the snow still clung to my eyelashes, as if the cold still gnawed at the edges of my breath. I had been alone for months then, tucked away in my cabin on the ridge, nursing a reputation that had gone rotten long before winter set in. Folks in Cinder Bend didn't look at me without remembering the ranch fire I never set, and shame has a way of settling in a man's bones heavier than frost. Perhaps that's why I was out in that storm at all. When the world already turns its back on you, a blizzard feels almost kind. But even in the thickest snow, a man knows the shape of a human fall, and I froze when I saw a figure collapse beneath the bending pines, their outlines swallowed by drifting white, as if the storm itself had chosen them. I moved toward the fallen shape, each step sinking into drifts up to my waist. The wind stung my cheeks like handfuls of grit, and the sky churned a dull silver that pressed down like a hand on my spine. The figure didn't move. I dropped to my knees beside them, breath snagging when I brushed snow from a young woman's face. She shivered so fiercely her teeth clicked like stones. A quiver of arrows was strapped across her back, their feathers rimmed with frost. I knew enough to recognize the handiwork of the White Elk tribe. Bringing her to my cabin meant trouble if discovery came, but leaving her meant certain death. Her pulse fluttered beneath my fingers like a bird fighting a snare. I looked over my shoulder at the storm-wild trees, knowing the world would judge me harshly again. Still, I gathered her into my arms, and the cold tightened like a secret around us both. In the dim glow of my cabin, the fire crackling low, the young woman stirred. Her eyes opened, dark, steady, bright even under exhaustion. She whispered her name, Yeppa Snowbird. Her voice trembled, but something in it held the hush of pine forests and river stones. She tried to sit up, though her limbs shook uncontrollably. The storm, it chooses its path with purpose, she murmured as if speaking to something I could not see. Suspicion flickered across her features but not fear, only the calm assessment of someone trained to read danger. I made broth and helped her drink, hands clumsy with unfamiliar gentleness. She watched me as though trying to decide what story lived behind my silence. Before I could offer one, a sudden crash struck the cabin wall hard enough to rattle the floorboards, and the fire jumped in its stone cradle as if startled. I grabbed my coat and stepped toward the noise, but Yeppa was already rising despite her weakness. One hand braced herself, the other reached instinctually for her bow. Outside, the wind wailed through the pines and snow slid from the roof in heavy sheets. I eased the door open and found a pine trunk, split by the storm, leaning heavily against the wall. We pushed against it together, her breath sharp with pain, but she didn't relent until the weight was redirected into the snow. When the strain eased, she steadied herself on the doorframe, her breath clouding in soft bursts. Only then did I truly see her courage, not loud, not reckless, but the quiet kind that grows roots in the hardest winters. She lifted her head, listening. Far below the ridge, someone, or something, moved through the drifts with deliberate steps, crunching ever closer. I braced myself, heart thudding like hooves in a canyon. But what emerged from the veil of snowfall was only a lone mare, trembling from cold, nostrils steaming. She nudged my shoulder, seeking shelter as any weary creature might. Yeppa stepped beside me, her expression softened by a gentle wonder that surprised me. Inside again, she warmed her hands by the fire and confessed her reason for wandering alone. She had been moving between tribal borders, carrying messages and learning the ways of other clans. Some mocked her quiet archery, saying she lacked the fierceness of a true White Elk warrior. The sting in her voice was familiar, too familiar. I told her nothing of my own disgrace, yet she sensed it anyway, studying me with an awareness that pressed gently but firmly against the walls I'd built. She asked what burden pulled my eyes toward the floor, and before I could form a lie, the fire flickered low, casting shadows that seemed to swallow my answer before it could leave my mouth. When dawn arrived, the storm loosened its grip, draping the valley in a glassy stillness that felt almost holy. We stepped outside, boots sinking into fresh snow that sparkled like crushed quartz. Yeppa insisted on repaying the shelter I'd given her. She placed her bow in my hands, adjusting my grip with careful precision. Her fingertips brushed my knuckles, and I felt something fragile shift in my chest, something thawing after too many winters. "The bow listens to breath," she said softly, guiding my stance. My first arrow wobbled pitifully, but she only smiled, adjusting my shoulders with a gentleness I hadn't felt in years. A question stirred inside me. Why did her gaze feel like a doorway opening instead of one slamming shut? Before I could ask, a low echo rolled down the valley, the mournful call of a horn that could only belong to the White Elk people. Figures emerged between the pines, warriors wrapped in storm-dark cloaks, riding through the snow with practiced ease. At their lead rode Chief Talon Snowbird, a man whose presence cut through the cold with the sharpness of flint. He dismounted before us, his gaze sweeping over Yepa with paternal relief, then shifting to me with careful, unreadable depth. Behind him, townsfolk from Cinder Bend peeked from the tree line, their breath rising in serpentine trails of suspicion. Rumors traveled faster than storms, and I could already see the accusation forming on their lips. A disgraced cowboy caught in the company of a tribal girl. Yepa stepped subtly closer to me, her shadow brushing mine, though she didn't seem fully aware of the gesture. Chief Talon addressed me in a steady voice, saying he had come not only to retrieve his daughter but to deliver a reward demanded by ancient tradition, one no outsider had ever been offered. The chief explained that in their lore, anyone who saved a life from the White Death of winter earned the chance to join their family line through oath, bond, or marriage should both hearts consent. His words held neither threat nor pressure, only the weight of an honor I felt wholly unworthy to receive. Shame surged hot beneath my skin. I didn't deserve to stand before them, much less be granted a path toward belonging. Yepa looked at me not with expectation but with warmth so gentle it startled me. Her eyes said she understood what it meant to be doubted, to be judged by whispers. I wanted to speak, to thank the chief and decline with grace, but before any words could form, movement stirred in the trees, settlers from Cinder Bend stepping closer, their suspicions hard as ice. One of them yelled that I'd schemed the entire rescue, hoping for favor with the tribe. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. I lowered my head as the accusation struck, the old shame blooming bitterly. Perhaps I would have stayed silent forever if not for Yepa. She stepped forward, bow in hand, her posture calm as the hush before snowfall. Instead of leveling the arrow at anyone, she lifted it toward the gnarled old oak standing between the groups. A tattered wanted poster, the one with my name and the false accusation of arson, clung stubbornly to its bark. Yepa loosed her arrow with a breath. The poster split down the middle, the pieces tumbling into the snow like dried leaves surrendering to winter. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The chief's warriors nodded with quiet approval while the townsfolk backed away, robbed of their certainty. Snow drifted between us all, softening edges that once seemed carved in stone. Chief Talon stepped closer, his boots sinking deep, his eyes fixed on mine with something like respect. He said the world offers few chances for rebirth, and rarer still to those already cast out. I felt Yepa beside me again, her hand brushing mine, not a plea, not a claim, just a grounding presence. Her small gesture held more truth than any promise spoken aloud. In that instant, the air felt thinner, charged with a possibility I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. A life beyond exile, beyond rumors, beyond the bitter solitude I'd worn like armor. The chief asked what path I wished to take. My throat tightened. A future with Yepa, shared, uncertain, tender, glimmered like the first star after dusk. Yet I hesitated, afraid that choosing hope might break under the weight of who I once was. But then Yepa squeezed my hand just slightly, and the last pieces of my shame loosened their hold. I lifted my head to meet the chief's gaze. I told him, not loudly, not boldly, but with the steady voice of a man reclaiming himself, that I wished to walk whatever path allowed me to honor the life I'd saved and the one she had already begun to heal. The murmurs around us faded. Yepa's smile was soft, almost shy, but it warmed me more than the rising sun. Together we began toward the waiting horses, the world seeming to widen instead of close. I paused only once, turning back toward Cinder Bend. The town that had once broken me looked smaller under the morning light, its harsh voices carried off by the wind like old ashes scattered into new snow. Years later, when winter presses close and the world grows quiet, I still think of that day, how storms can bury or reveal depending on the heart that walks through them. I remember how a stranger's courage pulled me from the hollow place where shame had settled. And if you're reading this, holding your own heaviness like a stone against your ribs, know this truth I learned on that snowbound ridge. The world may wound you, judge you, or leave you in the cold, but sometimes, without warning, it chooses you again. Sometimes a storm brings the very person meant to show you that broken things can still be claimed by light. And as the wind hums through the pines, I still hear the echo of that choice, urging you onward, toward whatever horizon waits with its quiet, open hands.